The cemetery's iron gates were always unlocked. It was a promise my nonna had made to the family who owned the plot next to ours, a promise that had trickled down to me through layers of grief and time. I came here when the world became too much, when the silence of my apartment was louder than the city's noise. Tonight, the world was a crushing weight. Rain fell in a soft, cold mist, clinging to my hair and coat, mirroring the damp misery within me. The job was gone. Not laid off, not made redundant, but evaporated. The startup I'd given my last 18 months to, the one I'd believed in with the fervor of a convert, had folded. The CEO, a man with a smile too sharp to be genuine, had called us into the conference room, used words like market correction and runway, and handed us envelopes with a month's severance, just like that. My professional life erased, the path I'd so carefully built, washed away in an afternoon. So I came to the one place that understood impermanence. The gravel path crunched under my worn boots, a familiar sound leading to a familiar headstone. But tonight, a wrong turn. A moment of disorientation in the thickening fog, and I found myself in a part of the cemetery I didn't know. This was old money. Marble mausoleums stood like miniature palaces, adorned with weeping angels and stoic saints. The air felt different here, heavier, saturated with the ghosts of old power and older sins. And then I saw her. Or rather, I saw the figure kneeling before a magnificent obsidian monument. A woman, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, her black dress merging with the darkness. A wave of empathy, sharp and immediate, cut through my own self-pity. I knew that kind of grief, the kind that hollowed you out, and left you raw in a cemetery long after visiting hours. Without thinking, I took a step closer. My foot snapped a twig. The figure went rigid, and then it turned. It wasn't a woman. It was a man whose face was a study in controlled agony, his dark eyes glistening in the low light, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle feathering. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, but his presence was ancient, immense. He wore a black, impeccably tailored overcoat, open to reveal a suit that probably cost more than my former annual salary. He wasn't just handsome. He was devastating, in a way that felt like a threat. I had stumbled into a sacred, private moment, and the air crackled with the violation. I'm so sorry, I stammered, my voice a fragile thing in the vast, silent space. I didn't mean to. I got lost. His gaze swept over me, assessing, cataloging. I felt transparent, every failure and fear laid bare under that penetrating stare. He didn't speak. He looked, his eyes tracing the tracks of my own tears, which I now realized were still fresh on my cheeks. The silence stretched, taut and dangerous. I took a stumbling step back, my heel catching on an uneven patch of ground. I braced for the fall, but it never came. A strong hand shot out, catching my elbow with a grip that was both firm and startlingly gentle. He had moved with impossible speed, now standing mere inches from me. The scent of him washed over me. Sandalwood, expensive soap in the clean, cold smell of the night. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was a mistake. A colossal mistake. I tried to pull my arm back, but his hold didn't loosen. His eyes, dark and bottomless, held mine captive. He leaned in, his breath a warm ghost against my rain-cooled ear. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble, barely a whisper, yet it seemed to vibrate through my very bones. He spoke 5 words that dismantled my reality, and rebuilt it into something, terrifying and new. Don't be afraid of me. The world tilted. It wasn't a request. It was a command, layered with a vulnerability so stark it stole my breath. He released my arm, and I swayed on my feet, unmoored. Before I could form a coherent thought, before I could run, figures emerged from the mist. 2 of them, large men in dark suits, their postures screaming of violence held in check. They stopped a respectful distance away, their eyes fixed on him, waiting. "Boss," one of them said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "The car is ready." Boss. The word landed in my stomach like a shard of ice. This wasn't just a man grieving his mother. This was something else entirely. Something from a world I only knew from headlines and crime dramas. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his eyes never leaving my face. He reached into his coat, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought he was going for a weapon. Instead, he produced a simple, pristine white handkerchief. He held it out to me. "Your tears are for a different grave," he said. His voice still quiet, but now laced with an unnerving intensity. "But grief is grief. It deserves respect." Mechanically, my fingers closed around the soft linen, It was still warm from his body heat. "Thank you," I whispered, the words feeling absurd. He turned then, his long coat swirling around his legs, and walked toward his men without a backward glance. They fell into step beside him, and the three of them were swallowed by the fog as silently as they had appeared. I stood there frozen, the handkerchief clutched in my hand, the phantom sensation of his touch on my elbow, his words echoing in my mind. "Don't be afraid of me." But the fear was already there, a cold, coiling serpent in my gut, because the most terrifying part wasn't the men, or the title, or the sheer power that radiated from him. It was the part of me that, for a single, reckless moment, hadn't been afraid at all. I finally looked at the gravestone he had been kneeling before. It was a single massive slab of polished black granite, inlaid in simple, elegant silver script were the words, "Isabella Rossi, beloved mother." And below that, a chilling epitaph. "Loyalty is the only currency. Rossi." I knew that name. Everyone in this city knew that name. It was a name whispered in connection to things that happened in shadows, to fortunes built on things that bled. My knees felt weak. Matteo Rossi had just given me a handkerchief, and I had no idea that my life, my carefully shattered life, was about to be remade in his image. The walk home was a blur. The rain intensified, soaking through my coat, but I barely felt it. The cold was inside me now, a deep, settling chill that had little to do with the weather. My mind replayed the encounter on a frantic, dizzying loop. The raw grief on his face, the impossible speed of his movement, the weight of his hand on my arm, the whisper, "Don't be afraid of me," and then, the name, Rossi. I fumbled with the keys to my apartment building, my fingers numb and clumsy. The lobby was dim, the fluorescent light flickering with a tired buzz. It smelled of stale cabbage and industrial cleaner, a stark, pathetic contrast to the scent of sandalwood and power that still seemed to cling to my clothes, to my skin. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. I bypassed the temperamental elevator and took the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the concrete stairwell. Each step felt heavy, weighed down by what had just happened. I was a ghost moving through my own life, the outlines of everything I knew suddenly seeming flimsy and insubstantial. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, leaning back against it as it clicked shut. The familiar space offered no comfort. The stack of unpaid bills was on the small table by the door, the wilting peace lily on the windowsill, the faded rug from a thrift store. It all looked like a stage set, a cheap imitation of life. I was still clutching the handkerchief. I looked down at it, the pristine white linen, a shocking anomaly in my muted beige world. I brought it to my face. It still carried his scent, a faint, intoxicating trace of sandalwood. A shiver, one that had nothing to do with the cold, ran down my spine. I tossed it onto the table as if it had burned me. What was I supposed to do with it? Launder it and return it? "Oh, hello, Mr. Crime Lord. Here's your handkerchief back. Thanks for the loan during my existential crisis at your mother's grave." The absurdity of it all hit me in a wave that left me breathless. A hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat, but it died before it could escape. The fear was too real. I pushed away from the door and went to the window, pulling back the thin curtain. The street below was empty, glistening under the amber glow of the streetlights. Rain streaked the glass, distorting the world outside. Was I being watched? The thought was paranoid, but it felt inevitable. People like Matteo Rossi didn't just have chance encounters. They had incidents, and incidents were managed, contained, or erased. My phone buzzed from inside my purse, making me jump. I dug it out, my heart thudding. It was Jessica. Of course, it was Jessica. She had a sixth sense for when I was at my lowest. I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't talk to her right now. I couldn't form sentences about my job, my future, or my normal problems. How could I explain that my biggest problem was no longer unemployment, but that I had just been spiritually marked by a man who probably ordered murders between courses of a 5-star meal? I needed to do something normal, something grounding. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. The ritual of making tea, boiling water, steeping the bag, adding honey was supposed to be calming. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The image of his eyes, dark and full of a pain so profound it mirrored my own, wouldn't leave me. We were two strangers, grieving different losses in the same rain-soaked cemetery. And for a fleeting moment, there had been a connection, a bridge across the impossible chasm between our worlds. The kettle whistled, a shrill sound that shattered the silence. I poured the water, the steam fogging my glasses. As I wiped them clean, my gaze fell again on the handkerchief. Loyalty is the only currency. The words from the gravestone echoed in my mind. What did that even mean? Was it a warning? A family motto? A threat? I took my tea and sat on the sofa, pulling my knees up to my chest. The hot mug did nothing to warm the ice in my veins. I thought about the men who had emerged from the mist. They hadn't looked like typical bodyguards. They moved with a fluid, predatory grace, their eyes constantly scanning, missing nothing. They were part of the architecture of his power, as natural and deadly as the marble angels in that cemetery. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Jessica. "Hey, you okay? Call me when you get this. Worried about you." Guilt twisted in my gut. Jessica was my anchor, the one person who had seen me through every breakup, every family drama, every professional setback. She deserved the truth, but the truth was a locked box I couldn't open, for her safety and for mine. I typed back a reply, my fingers feeling thick and stupid. "I'm okay. Just a really rough day. Lost the job. Hiding under a blanket. We'll call tomorrow, promise." I hit send, the lie settling like a stone in my stomach. Hiding under a blanket wasn't a metaphor anymore. I felt the urge to do just that, to crawl into my bed, pull the covers over my head, and will the world to reset to a version where I had never taken a wrong turn in a cemetery. But I knew, with a certainty that was as terrifying as it was absolute, that the world had already reset. The old version was gone. I finished my tea and forced myself to get up, to move, to perform the mundane rituals of preparing for bed. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and changed into my worn pajamas. Each action felt like I was playing a part, going through the motions of being the person I used to be. When I finally turned out the light and lay in the darkness, the events of the evening rushed in to fill the void. The whisper was the loudest thing in the room. "Don't be afraid of me." I squeezed my eyes shut. But I was afraid of him, of his world, of the men who moved like shadows. But more than that, I was afraid of the part of me that was intrigued. The part that wondered what it would be like to be under the protection of a man like that, instead of being crushed by the indifferent machinery of the world. The part that replayed the gentleness of his grip, the startling vulnerability in his eyes, and felt a pull that was as primal as it was foolish. Sleep was a long time coming. When it did, it was fitful and filled with dreams of black marble graves, whispered words that twisted into threats, and a pair of dark eyes that watched me, always watched me, from the shadows. The following 2 days passed in a strange, suspended haze. I moved through my apartment like a ghost, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, every car that slowed a little too long outside. The world outside my window seemed newly charged with threat and possibility. Every black sedan was a potential sentinel from his world. Every stranger on the street might be one of his men, or one of his enemies. I tried to muster the energy to update my resume, to scour job boards, but the task felt laughably trivial. How could I care about optimizing my LinkedIn profile when I was holding the personal linen of a Mafia boss? The handkerchief remained on my table, a silent, accusing monument to the shift in my reality. I couldn't bring myself to touch it again, but I couldn't throw it away either. It was a talisman, a connection to a night that had cleaved my life in two. On the third morning, a firm, rapid knock sounded at my door. It wasn't the friendly, rhythmic tap of a neighbor. It was the sound of authority, of purpose. My blood ran cold. I crept to the door, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I peered through the peephole. A man stood there, his posture ramrod straight. He was dressed in a severe, dark suit, his hair cut short, his expression utterly unreadable. He wasn't one of the men from the cemetery, but he was cut from the same cloth. I knew with a sinking certainty who he was here for. I considered not answering. I considered pretending I wasn't home. But a deeper, more resigned part of me knew that was pointless. Men like this didn't go away. I took a shaky breath, smoothed my rumpled sweatshirt, and opened the door a crack, the chain lock still engaged. "Can I help you?" My voice was a thin, reedy thing. "Alara Vance?" he asked, his voice flat and professional. "Yes. My name is Franco. I work for Mr. Rossi." He said the name not with fear, but with a simple, matter-of-fact finality, as if stating a law of physics. "He would like to speak with you." The words, though expected, still sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my system. "Speak with me? About what?" He did not specify the topic. "He requests your presence." It wasn't a request. It was a beautifully worded command. I'm not really available today," I said, the protest sounding weak even to my own ears. Franco's expression did not change. He didn't threaten or cajole. He stood there, his presence a wall of unshakable intent. It would be in your best interest to make yourself available. Miss Vance, the car is waiting downstairs. My eyes darted past him down the hallway. I saw another man, similarly dressed, standing near the stairwell exit, his arms crossed. There was no escape. This was happening. The fantasy of the other night, the fleeting connection, was colliding with the brutal reality of his world. He hadn't forgotten me. And now I was being collected. "Give me 5 minutes," I whispered, my throat tight. He gave a curt nod. "We will wait." I closed the door, my legs trembling so violently I had to lean against it for support. What did he want? Was I in trouble? Had my presence at the grave been deemed an insult? Or was it something else? The memory of his whisper, the intensity in his eyes flashed in my mind, a confusing counterpoint to the terror. I rushed to my bedroom, pulling off my sweats and fumbling for a pair of clean jeans and a simple sweater. I didn't have time for anything more. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tie my hair back into a messy ponytail. I grabbed my purse, my keys, and my phone. My gaze fell once more on the handkerchief. On an impulse I didn't understand, I snatched it up and stuffed it into my pocket. When I reopened the door, Franco's eyes swept over me. A quick, efficient assessment. He seemed neither approving nor disapproving. "This way." He led me down the stairs, his partner falling into step behind us. The presence at my back was profoundly unnerving. In the lobby, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was checking her mail. She stared, her eyes wide, as the 2 large men in suits escorted me out. I offered her a weak, terrified smile that probably looked more like a grimace. A black SUV, its windows tinted to an opaque midnight, was idling at the curb. Franco opened the rear door for me. The interior was silent, smelling of rich leather and a clean antiseptic scent. It was the opposite of my world in every way. Ordered, powerful, controlled. I slid inside, and Franco closed the door with a solid, expensive thud. He got into the passenger seat, and the driver, a man who never once turned around, pulled smoothly into traffic. We drove in absolute silence. I watched my neighborhood, my city, pass by the window, but it felt like I was watching a film. I was no longer a part of it. I was being transported to another realm. I clutched the strap of my purse, my knuckles white. The handkerchief in my pocket felt like a live wire. We didn't go to a skyscraper or a notorious social club. We drove to a quiet, tree-lined street of elegant brownstones in a neighborhood I could never afford even to walk through. The SUV stopped before one of the most imposing ones, its facade weathered but impeccably maintained. Franco was out and opening my door before the engine had fully settled. "Come," he said. He led me up the stone steps. The front door opened before we reached it, held by another silent, suited man. The interior was a shock. It wasn't gaudy or opulent in a criminal way. It was understated, tasteful, museum-like. Polished dark wood floors, original artwork on the walls that looked like it belonged in a gallery, and furniture that was both modern and classic. The air was still and calm. It was a home, but it felt more like a fortress disguised as a sanctuary. Franco led me to a set of double doors. He knocked once, then opened them. "Wait here," he instructed. He ushered me into a library. Floor-to-ceiling, bookshelves laden with leather-bound volumes stretched to the ceiling. A large, heavy desk sat near a fireplace, but the room felt more like a place for quiet contemplation than for business. And there, standing by the window, silhouetted against the gray daylight, was Matteo Rossi. He turned as I entered. He was dressed more casually than in the cemetery, dark slacks, and a simple black sweater, but the power emanating from him was, if anything, more intense. The cut of his jaw, the intensity of his gaze, it was all sharper in the clear, sober light of day. The grief I had seen was now buried deep beneath a surface of impenetrable calm. Franco withdrew, closing the doors behind him, leaving me alone with him. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the frantic beat of my own heart. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked at me, that same assessing, cataloging gaze from the cemetery. But now it felt more clinical, less raw. "Ilara," he said finally. His voice was deeper than I remembered, a smooth, dark velvet that wrapped around the single syllable of my name. "Mr. Rossi," I managed to choke out. A flicker of something, amusement, crossed his features. "Matteo." He took a step toward me, and I instinctively took a step back, my shoulders pressing against the solid wood of the doors. He stopped, his head tilting slightly. "I told you not to be afraid of me. You also had 2 men escort me here like a prisoner," I said, the words bursting out with a courage I didn't know I possessed. Precautions, he replied, his tone unchanging. For your safety as much as mine. The world I inhabit does not look kindly on loose ends. And you, Alara, are currently a very intriguing loose end. His words hung in the air between us, a stark admission of my new precarious status. A loose end, something to be tied up or snipped off. I forced myself to stand a little straighter, to meet his gaze despite the tremor in my hands, which I clenched into fists at my sides. I didn't see anything, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I was lost, I cried. You gave me a handkerchief. That's the whole story. There's nothing to be a loose end about. Matteo watched me, a predator considering the logic of its prey. He moved to his desk, leaning back against it, crossing his arms. The casual pose did nothing to diminish his authority. It merely framed it differently. Perception is a fragile thing. My enemies see a woman, a stranger, sharing a private moment with me at my mother's grave. They will not believe it was an accident. They will dig. They will find out who you are, and they will assume you are significant. Significant how? The question was out before I could stop it. A weakness, he said, the word dropping into the quiet room like a stone. A vulnerability, a lever to be used against me, or, if they believe you are an ally, a target to be removed to cause me pain. In my world, Alara, there are no innocent bystanders. There are only assets and liabilities. The cold logic of it was inescapable. I had been branded solely by proximity. My ordinary life had been rendered a potential weapon in a war I didn't understand. The fear was back, a cold sweat prickling at the base of my spine. So what does that make me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. That is what I am trying to determine. He pushed off the desk and began to pace slowly, a panther in a gilded cage. You lost your job. 3 days ago? It wasn't a question. A fresh wave of ice washed through me. You investigated me. I protect my interests. And as of 3 nights ago, you became one of them. He stopped his pacing and looked directly at me. Tell me about it. The command was so unexpected, so bizarrely personal that I could only stare. What? The job. Losing it, tell me. There was no pity in his tone, only a detached curiosity that was somehow more unnerving than sympathy. And something in me, the raw, bruised part that had been weeping in that cemetery, broke open. The professional humiliation, the financial terror, the sheer, gutting unfairness of it all came spilling out in a torrent of words. I couldn't have stopped if I tried. I told him about the startup, the 80-hour weeks, the belief that we were building something meaningful. I told him about the CEO's empty promises, the sudden, sterile meeting, the way he'd used words like pivot and downsizing to disguise the fact that he'd taken our passion and our time and set them on fire. I told him about the severance that wouldn't cover a month's rent, the panic of a barren bank account, the feeling of utter disposability. I didn't look at him as I spoke. I looked at the patterns in the Persian rug, my words tumbling over each other, fueled by a grief I had been too shocked and scared to feel until now fully. When I finally finished, the room was silent again, but the quality of the silence had changed. It felt charged, attentive. I risked a glance at him. He wasn't looking at me with condescension or boredom. He was analyzing me, as if my personal catastrophe were a complex business proposal. You gave your loyalty to a man who did not value it, he stated, his voice flat. You invested your currency in a bankrupt enterprise. The words were harsh, but they held a brutal, undeniable truth. It wasn't just a job, I whispered, defending a ghost. It was my life. A life built on sand. He took a step closer. Loyalty must be reciprocated. It must be earned and honored. Otherwise, it is merely foolishness. Is that the family motto? I asked, a spark of defiance igniting in my chest. The one on your mother's stone? You think my grief is foolish? For the first time, a crack appeared in his impassive facade. A flicker of something dark and dangerous. I think your grief is misdirected. You mourn the loss of something that was never real. That is a luxury my mother never had. He closed the final distance between us, and I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. The sheer physicality of him was overwhelming. I did not bring you here to discuss your failed career. Then why did you? I breathed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Because context matters. I needed to understand who you are when your world falls apart. His eyes searched mine, probing, dissecting. You are here because your presence at my mother's grave has created a problem. And I solve problems. The simplest solution would be to make you disappear. The blood drained from my face. My knees felt liquid. He saw the terror in my eyes, and incredibly, he shook his head. A minute, almost imperceptible movement. But that is not the solution I am choosing. He reached out, and before I could flinch away, his fingers brushed against the pocket of my jeans. He didn't plunge his hand in. He touched the fabric where the linen square was folded. You kept it. I couldn't speak. I could only nod, a jerky, helpless motion. Why? I found my voice a ragged thread of sound. I don't know. It was the only honest answer I had. He held my gaze for a long, suspended moment, his fingers still resting against the pocket, a point of contact that burned through the denim. The air crackled with a tension I couldn't name. Fear. Yes, but also a terrifying, magnetic pull. The situation requires management, he said, his voice dropping, becoming almost intimate. You cannot return to your life. Not as it was. It is no longer safe for you. And by extension, your presence there becomes a vulnerability for me. You will stay here, under my protection, until I determine the threat has passed. It wasn't a request. It was a decree. I was being taken, absorbed, removed from the board. You can't just keep me, I protested, the words weak. I am not keeping you. I am ensuring you remain alive. This is not a negotiation, Alara. His hand fell away from my pocket and he took a step back. The moment of strange intimacy broken. Franco will show you to your rooms. You will have everything you need. Do not attempt to leave. The men stationed outside will not be as polite as I am being. He turned his back on me, an apparent dismissal, and walked back to the window, reclaiming his position as a silhouette against the city. The audience was over. I stood there trembling, my mind reeling. I had walked into this room as an unemployed woman grieving the loss of her future. I was leaving it as a prisoner, an asset, a liability, a kept woman in a gilded cage, all because of a wrong turn in the rain and a whispered command not to be afraid. The doors opened behind me. Franco stood there, waiting. I turned and walked out on unsteady legs, the ghost of his touch on my hip, the weight of his decision settling on my shoulders like a shroud. My old life was over. This was my new one. Franco led me up a sweeping staircase, his silence more oppressive than any interrogation. The second-floor hallway was as immaculate and hushed as the floor below, the air smelling of lemon polish and old money. He stopped before a heavy dark wood door and pushed it open, standing aside for me to enter. The room was not a cell. It was a suite fit for a luxury hotel, and it made my entire apartment look like a storage closet. A large four-poster bed with a dove-gray silk duvet dominated one side of the room. A sitting area with a plush velvet sofa and a marble-topped coffee table occupied the other. French doors led to a small private balcony overlooking a walled garden below. The ensuite bathroom, which I glimpsed through an open door, was all white marble and gleaming chrome, with a tub deep enough to swim in. Your belongings will be retrieved from your residence, Franco stated, his voice cutting through my stunned silence. Is there anything specific you require immediately? My laptop, I said automatically, the professional part of my brain kicking in despite the circumstances. My charger, my translation dictionaries. They're on my desk. He gave a curt nod. It will be done. Meals will be brought to you. Do not leave this room without an escort. His eyes, cold and assessing, held mine for a moment. It is for your safety. The boss's orders are absolute. With that, he closed the door. I heard the distinct final sound of a key turning in the lock. I was indeed a prisoner, no matter how beautiful the cage. I stood in the center of the room, hugging myself. The sheer surreal normality of my request, my translation, dictionaries, clashed violently with the reality of my situation. I walked to the French doors and tried the handle. Locked. I peered through the glass at the garden below. It was perfectly manicured, but I saw two men walking a deliberate patrol along the high stone wall. There would be no climbing down. A hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat. 48 hours ago, my biggest worry was making rent. Now I was a captive in a Mafia kingpin's brownstone, my continued existence dependent on his whims. I thought of Jessica. She would be expecting a call, a detailed post-mortem of my job loss. What could I possibly tell her? Sorry, Jess, can't talk. I've been indefinitely detained by a crime lord who finds me a fascinating liability. The panic began to rise, a hot, tightening coil in my chest. I was trapped. I paced the length of the room, my mind racing, looking for an exit, a loophole, anything. There was none. Matteo Rossi's will was the architecture of this place, and I was just a piece of furniture that had been moved inside. Hours bled into one another. The light outside the window began to fade, painting the room in shades of deep blue and gray. A quiet knock preceded the door opening. A woman, perhaps in her 50s, with a severe but not unkind face, entered carrying a tray. She set it down on the coffee table without a word. It held a simple, elegant meal: seared salmon, roasted vegetables, and a glass of water. The normality of it was somehow the most terrifying thing of all. "Thank you," I whispered as she turned to leave. She paused and gave me a slight, almost imperceptible nod before exiting. The lock turned again. I didn't touch the food. My stomach was a knot of anxiety. As full dark fell, the exhaustion of the last few days, compounded by the sheer emotional whiplash of today, crashed over me. I crawled onto the massive bed, still in my jeans and sweater, and curled into a ball. The sheets were impossibly soft, the mattress yielding. I stared into the growing darkness, listening to the sounds of the house. It was mostly silent, but occasionally I heard the faint creak of a floorboard, the muffled sound of a door closing somewhere down the hall. Life was going on here, a secret, powerful life, and I was now a small, unwitting part of its ecosystem. I must have dozed off because the sound of the lock turning again jolted me awake. The room was dark. The door opened, and a silhouette filled the frame. Not the housekeeper. Not Franco. It was him. Matteo stood there, backlit by the dim hall light. He had changed into a black shirt, the top button undone, the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He held a small duffel bag in one hand. He didn't speak for a long moment, just stood there watching me as my heart tried to beat its way out of my chest. "I brought your things," he said finally, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. He stepped inside and placed the bag on the floor at the foot of the bed. "Your laptop is in there, your books, some clothes." He had been inside my apartment. The violation should have felt absolute, but I was too numb, too overwhelmed to feel it. "Thank you," I managed, pushing myself up to a sitting position. He didn't leave. He walked over to the French doors and looked out at the dark garden. His hands shoved into it. "This is not what I wanted," he said, more to the window than to me. "Then let me go." "I can't." He turned to face me, his expression hidden in shadow, but I could feel the intensity of his gaze. What I said downstairs was true. You are a target now. Letting you walk out that door would be a death sentence. And I am not in the habit of signing death warrants for people who have done nothing wrong, except intrude on your grief, I countered, a spark of my earlier defiance returning. A pause. "Except that." He took a step toward the bed. "You asked me why I brought you here. The investigation was one reason, but it wasn't the only one." He stopped a few feet from me. "I saw myself and you standing there in the rain." I stared at him, bewildered. "What?" "The desolation. The feeling that the world has fundamentally broken, and you are the only one who can see the cracks." His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual authority. "I have stood in that rain many times. I know what it does to a person." We were back in the cemetery, connected by a shared, silent understanding of ruin. The fear was still there, a constant hum in the background, but it was now mingled with a profound, terrifying curiosity. This man, this monster, was showing me a crack in his own armor. "Why are you telling me this?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Because I need you to understand that this," he gestured around the opulent room, "is not a punishment. It is a necessity. And because," he hesitated, a rare thing for a man who seemed to wield certainty like a weapon, "because I find I do not want you to look at me with fear in your eyes." His words hung in the dark room, a confession more shocking than any threat. He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked out, closing the door behind him. This time I didn't hear the lock turn. I sat in the silence he left behind, my mind reeling. The threat was still real, my captivity absolute. But the jailer had just shown me his own chains, and I, against all reason and sense, felt a dangerous, inexplicable pull toward the man who held the key. The unlocked door was a test. I knew it with a certainty that felt as innate as breathing. It was a measure of my compliance, or perhaps my intelligence. Walking out would be an act of profound stupidity, a rejection of the protection he'd explicitly stated I needed. It would be spitting in the face of a man who did not tolerate disrespect. So I stayed. I used the lavish bathroom, the hot water from the rainfall showerhead, a small physical comfort in a world of psychological turmoil. I changed into my own pajamas from the duffel bag, a soft, worn t-shirt and cotton shorts that smelled faintly of my lavender laundry detergent, a scent from a life that already felt years away. My laptop was there, as promised, along with a few folders of work and my dog-eared dictionaries. The normalcy of these items in this place was jarring. Sleep, when it finally came, was deep and dreamless, my body and mind succumbing to total exhaustion. I woke to pale morning light filtering through the windows. For a single disorienting moment, I thought I was in a hotel. Then memory crashed back, a cold, sobering wave. I was in Matteo Rossi's house, his prisoner. His what? Liability? Guest? I didn't have a word for what I was. The door was still unlocked. I opened it cautiously and peered into the hallway. It was empty and silent. The smell of coffee and something, baking, maybe muffins, drifted up from the floor below. The domestic scent was surreal. I retreated into my room, my heart pounding from the simple act of looking into the hall. I felt like a mouse let out of its cage, too frightened actually to leave. An hour later, another quiet knock. It was the same severe woman from last night. She carried a breakfast tray, eggs, toast, fresh fruit, and a pot of coffee. "Good morning, Miss Vance," she said, her voice flat. "My name is Clara. Is there anything you require?" Is the door supposed to be unlocked?" I asked the question, feeling foolish. "Mr. Rossi's orders were changed this morning," she said, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. "You are free to move about the upper floor. The library, the sunroom, the lower floors and exits remain restricted." So I was being granted a larger cage, a trust exercise. I nodded, not knowing what else to do. She left, and the door was left ajar again. I ate the breakfast. The food tasted like it was in my mouth, despite its obvious quality. The coffee was rich and intense, and I drank it greedily, needing the caffeine to sharpen my frayed nerves. After I'd eaten, I ventured out into the hallway again. It was just as still. I strolled, my socks silent on the thick runner carpet. I found the library where I'd spoken with Matteo. It was empty. I trailed my fingers over the leather-bound spines of the books. They were honest, well-read, not just for show. History, philosophy, volumes of poetry in Italian and English. This was not the library of a thug. It was the library of a man with a mind, a fact that was somehow more disconcerting. I found a sunroom at the end of the hall, filled with lush green plants and wicker furniture. The windows here looked out over the street. I saw a black SUV parked across the way, its windows tinted. One of Franco's men, no doubt, always watching. I retreated to my room, the brief foray into the broader world of the upper floor leaving me more unsettled than before. I needed to do something, anything to feel like myself. I opened my laptop and connected to the Wi-Fi. It was open. No password. Another small, pointed gesture of trust or perhaps surveillance. I opened a translation file I'd been neglecting. A dense technical manual for a German engineering firm. The familiar cadence of the language, the puzzle of finding the perfect equivalent phrase, was a lifeline. For a few hours I lost myself in the work. The world outside this room, outside this brownstone, fading into a distant hum. The sound of the front door opening and closing downstairs, followed by the low murmur of male voices, pulled me back to the present. My concentration shattered. I listened, my body tense. Footsteps on the stairs. They passed my door and continued down the hall. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. A few minutes later, there was a tap on my doorframe. I looked up. Matteo stood there leaning against the jamb. He had changed again into a fresh suit, this one a deep charcoal gray. He looked immaculate, powerful, completely in control. The man from last night who had spoken of shared desolation was gone, replaced by the boss. "Working?" he asked, his gaze flicking to my open laptop. "It's what I do," I said, my voice coming out defensive. He nodded slowly. "Good." He stepped fully into the room and the space seemed to shrink around him. He picked up one of my translation dictionaries from the bedside table, thumbing through it with long, elegant fingers that looked capable of both great gentleness and great violence. "You speak 3 languages." "4," I corrected without thinking. "German, French, Italian, and Spanish." I read Portuguese. His eyes met mine over the top of the book, a glint of interest in their dark depths. "Impressive. A valuable skill set." "It was, until 3 days ago," I said, the bitterness seeping through. "You were working for the wrong people." He set the book down. "I have a proposition for you." I stared at him, wary. "What kind of proposition?" "I have documents. Business contracts, correspondence. Some are in German. My usual translator is otherwise occupied. I need them reviewed. Confidentiality is paramount." He held my gaze. "You will do it. I will pay you. Triple your previous rate. It was so absurd, so perfectly calculated that I almost laughed. He was offering me a job inside my own prison. He was giving me purpose, a way to earn money, to use my skills, all while keeping me under his thumb. It was a masterstroke, a way to pacify me, to make me useful, to bind me to him with something other than fear. The chains were being gilded, and my own hands were fitting them. And if I refuse? I asked, my throat dry. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. Then you sit in this room and stare at the walls. The choice is yours. But a mind like yours is not meant for idleness. It will eat itself alive. He saw right through me. He saw the part of me that was already going stir-crazy. The professional who was itching for a challenge. The woman who needed to be helpful to feel sane. He had investigated me and understood me. That was the most terrifying thing of all. I looked from his impassive face to my laptop, to the open file that represented my old, shattered life. This was a new one, offered on a plate of polished silver. Dangerous, morally ambiguous, potentially damning. But it was a life. It was something to do. Send me the documents, I heard myself say. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, making him look younger, almost approachable. The effect was devastating. I'll have Franco bring them up. He turned and left. I sat there, my heart pounding, my hands trembling slightly. I had just agreed to work for a Mafia boss. I had accepted my role in this new, terrifying narrative. I was no longer just a liability. I was now on the payroll. Franco appeared 20 minutes later with a slim, locked briefcase. He set it on the coffee table with a definite thud, then produced a minor key and unlocked it. Inside were 3 thick folders, each brimming with documents. These are the originals, he said, his tone implying their immense value or their danger. You will work on them here. No copies, no digital files. You take notes by hand on this. He placed a brand new, leather-bound notebook and a pen beside the briefcase. When you are finished for the day, everything goes back in the case, and it is returned to me. Is that understood? The protocols were military in their precision. I nodded, a fresh wave of apprehension washing over me. This wasn't just translating a technical manual. This felt different, heavier. Understood. He left, and I was alone with the briefcase. I sat on the floor by the coffee table, my heart thumping. I opened the first folder. The documents on top were indeed in German. They appeared to be a corporate acquisition proposal, dense with legal and financial jargon. It looked legitimate, if complex. But as I delved deeper, the veneer of normalcy began to crack. The company names were vague. The addresses were P.O. boxes in Liechtenstein and the Cayman Islands, and the financial projections were audaciously, suspiciously optimistic. My translator's brain, trained to spot inconsistencies, began firing warning signals. This wasn't just a business deal. This was a facade, a beautifully constructed lie designed to move massive amounts of money through a series of shell corporations. I was looking at a blueprint for high finance money laundering. My hands grew cold. This was the reality of his world. It wasn't all back alley shootings and whispered threats. It was this, cold, calculated, and conducted in boardrooms with documents just like these. By asking me to translate them, Matteo wasn't just giving me busy work. He was showing me his world. He was testing me. He was pulling me deeper inside, making me complicit. A part of me screamed to stop, to close the folders and demand to be let go. But the professional, the curious, the deeply intrigued part of me was already reaching for the notebook and pen. The puzzle was too compelling. The chance to see the hidden machinery of power was too seductive. I began to work. The hours melted away. I became absorbed in the intricate web of lies, cross-referencing terms, making notes on the questionable clauses, the oddly phrased liability sections that seemed designed to be unenforceable. I was so deep in the work that I didn't hear the door open. Making progress? I jumped, my pen skidding across the page. Matteo stood over me, having entered as silently as a ghost. He had removed his suit jacket and tie, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong corded forearms. He looked down at the documents spread around me and at my notebook, filled with tight analytical script. "This isn't a real acquisition," I said, the words tumbling out before I could consider the wisdom of telling them. "The clauses in Section 4B are deliberately misleading. The valuation is based on assets that don't exist. It's a shell game." He was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he slowly lowered himself onto the floor opposite me, his movements fluid and controlled. He picked up one of my notes, his eyes scanning my handwriting. The proximity was electrifying. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap, see the dark stubble beginning to shadow his jaw. "Explain," he commanded, his voice low. So I did. I walked him through it, pointing out the inconsistencies, the linguistic tricks, the financial sleight of hand. I spoke the language of fraud, and he listened. His gaze fixed on me with an intensity that was both flattering and frightening. I was no longer just a translator. I was an analyst, and he was my sole terrifying audience. When I finished, he didn't speak immediately. He just looked at me, a new, profound respect in his eyes. My last translator missed that. He saw the words, but not the pattern. He set the paper down. "You see the pattern. It's what I'm good at," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The space between us on the floor felt charged, intimate. We were two conspirators surrounded by evidence of his empire's secrets. "You are wasted on technical manuals," he stated. "A mind that can deconstruct this is a rare thing." His gaze dropped to my lips for a fleeting second. So fast I thought I might have imagined it. My breath hitched. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. The memory of his whisper in the cemetery, his confession in the dark last night, the sheer magnetic pull of him. It all coalesced in this moment, on this floor, surrounded by his criminal enterprises. I should have been repulsed. I should have been terrified. But all I felt was a dizzying, dangerous attraction. He reached out not to touch me, but to pick up a stray pen that had rolled near his knee. His fingers brushed against the bare skin of my ankle. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt of pure lightning through my entire system. My eyes flew to his. His eyes were dark, dilated, holding mine captive. The door downstairs slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the house. The spell shattered. Mateo's expression closed off instantly, the intensity replaced by cool control. He rose to his feet in one smooth, powerful motion. "Continue your work," he said, his voice once again that of the boss, distant and authoritative. "Franco will collect the case before dinner." He left the room without a backward glance. I sat on the floor, my skin still tingling from where he had touched me, my heart pounding a frantic, chaotic rhythm. I looked at the documents, at my notes, at the briefcase that held the secrets of his power. I was falling not just into his world, but for him. And the terrifying part was I wasn't sure I wanted to stop. The next few days developed a strange, new rhythm, a bizarre parody of everyday life. I would wake, Clara would bring breakfast, and Franco would deliver the locked briefcase. I would spend the morning and afternoon immersed in the documents, my mind a whirl of financial structures and linguistic puzzles. Mateo was gone during the day, attending to the business of his empire, but his presence still filled the house. It was in the way the staff spoke in hushed tones, in the way Franco's posture straightened just before a phone call from him, in the very air, which seemed to hum with a low current of controlled power. He began to join me in the evenings. It was never announced or formal. He would appear in the doorway of the library or the sunroom, where I had taken to working for the change of scenery. At first he would ask about my progress, his questions sharp and insightful, probing the analytical leaps I had made. Then the conversations began to drift. He'd ask about my time studying abroad in France, and I'd find myself describing the smell of fresh bread in a Parisian morning, the sound of the language swirling around me. In return, he'd share a memory of a childhood summer spent in Sicily at his grandmother's villa, the sun-bleached stone, the taste of lemons straight from the tree. We were building a bridge, plank by careful plank, over the chasm that separated our worlds. He was a captivating storyteller, his voice a low, mesmerizing instrument. He could make the brutal politics of his world sound like a chess match. And the moments of beauty he described, a perfect opera, a painting that moved him, felt like glimpses into a soul he kept heavily guarded. I knew it was a calculated seduction. He was showing me the man behind the myth, the intellectual behind the enforcer, and it was working. The fear was still there, a constant low-level hum, but it was now woven through with strands of fascination and a deepening, terrifying attraction. I found myself listening for the sound of his footsteps in the hall, my pulse quickening when I heard his voice downstairs. One evening, about a week after I'd started working for him, he found me in the library. I was standing by the shelves, running my finger along the spine of a collection of Italian poetry. "You read Italian," his voice came from behind me, making me jump. I turned. He was leaning against the doorframe, watching me, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. "I do. However, poetry is always a challenge. The meaning is so layered. It is the only form of truth that matters," he said, pushing off the doorframe and walking toward me. Everything else is just facts. Numbers, transactions. He stopped beside me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He reached past me, his arm brushing against my shoulder, and pulled a different, slimmer volume from the shelf. This one, try this. It's less obscure. He handed me the book. It was a collection by Eugenio Montale. Our fingers brushed during the exchange, and a spark, hot and immediate, passed between us. My breath caught. His eyes darkened, holding mine. The air in the room grew thick, charged with the tension that had been building for days. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered, the question torn from me. "Doing what?" His voice was hushed, intimate. "This talking to me, showing me these things. I'm your prisoner. Are you?" He took a half step closer, eliminating the last bit of space between us. I had to tilt my head back to look up at him. "Do you feel like a prisoner right now?" In that moment, surrounded by the scent of old books and his sandalwood cologne, with his dark eyes consuming me, I didn't. I felt like the center of a universe, a dangerous, intoxicating universe that revolved around him. "I should," I breathed. "But you don't. It wasn't a question." He raised a hand, and with a hesitation that was utterly captivating in a man of his absolute power, he gently brushed a stray strand of hair from my cheek. His touch was featherlight, but it burned. "I brought you here to keep you safe. I keep you here now because I find your mind fascinating, and because I cannot stand the thought of you not being near me." The confession was his most direct yet. It was raw, honest, and utterly disarming. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. All the warnings, all the logic screamed at me to pull away. But my body, my treacherous, longing heart, was leaning in. His gaze dropped to my lips. The world narrowed to this single point in space and time, in a library filled with silent stories, on the precipice of our own. "Matteo," I whispered, a final, weak protest. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his voice a low thrum that vibrated through me. His thumb stroked my cheekbone. "And I will. I will walk out of this room and never speak of this again. This is your choice, Ilara. Always your choice." And in that, he gave me the one thing I thought I had lost forever: agency, the power to decide my own path, even if that path led directly into the fire. I didn't tell him to stop. I rose onto my toes, closing the infinitesimal distance between us, and pressed my lips to his. For a heartbeat, he was perfectly still, as if shocked by my audacity. Then, with a low guttural sound that was part groan, part triumph, he responded. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me flush against the hard, unyielding planes of his body. The book of poetry fell from my limp fingers, forgotten on the floor. His kiss was not gentle. It was hungry, possessive, acclaiming. It was a torrent of suppressed desire and unspoken connection, finally unleashed. His hands tangled in my hair, tilting my head to deepen the kiss, and I met him with a desperation of my own, my fingers clutching at the fabric of his shirt, holding on as the world dissolved into sensation. It was a kiss that tasted of danger and salvation, of whispered secrets in a rainy cemetery and the terrifying thrill of freefall. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing raggedly, foreheads pressed together. "Well," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion, "that complicates things." A shaky, incredulous laugh escaped me. "You think?" He smiled then, a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger, lighter. It was the most beautiful, dangerous thing I had ever seen. "I don't care," he whispered and kissed me again. Softer this time, I promise. And in that moment, wrapped in the arms of a Mafia kingpin, I realized with a soul-deep certainty that I didn't care either. The kiss changed the atmosphere in the house. It was a silent earthquake that only the two of us could feel. The following day, the routine was the same. The briefcase, the documents, the quiet hours of work. But the air was thick with a new electric charge. When Clara brought my lunch, I caught her giving me a longer, more thoughtful look, as if she could see the imprint of his lips on mine. When Franco delivered the documents, his usual impassive mask seemed somehow more pronounced, as if deliberately ignoring the shift in the universe. Matteo didn't come to me that day. I felt his absence like a physical ache, a hollow space in the house's rhythm. The doubt began to creep in. Had it been a moment of madness for him? A fleeting indulgence with a captive audience? Had I, in my desperation for connection, misread the entire situation? The professional documents in front of me blurred, the words turning into a jumble of anxiety. But that evening, As I sat in the window seat of the sunroom watching the streetlights flicker on, he found me. He didn't speak. He walked in, sat beside me on the cushioned bench, and took my hand. His fingers laced through mine, warm and sure. It was a simple gesture, but it held more intimacy than the frantic kiss the night before. It was a statement, a confirmation. "We need to talk," he said, his voice quiet, his gaze fixed on our joined hands. "Okay," I whispered, my heart in my throat. "The world I live in, it has rules. My position requires a certain image. Control is everything. Showing weakness, showing attachment, can be fatal." He looked at me then, his eyes serious. "What happened last night? It breaks every one of those rules." The hollow feeling in my stomach expanded. This was the rejection I had feared, the cold, complex reality reasserting itself. "I understand," I said, trying to pull my hand away. His grip tightened, refusing to let go. "No, you don't. I'm not saying it was a mistake." He took a deep breath, a rare show of uncertainty. "I am saying it makes you a target in a way you weren't before. If my enemies perceive you as a vulnerability, their focus on you will intensify. The protection I can offer you becomes more complex, more absolute." He wasn't pushing me away. He was pulling me closer, deeper into the fortress of his life. He was telling me that choosing him came with a higher price, a greater danger. "What are you saying, Mateo?" "I'm saying that if we continue down this path, there is no going back. For you. For me." His thumb stroked the back of my hand. "I am a possessive man, Ilara. If you are mine completely. There will be no half measures, no casual dating, no walking away when it gets difficult. You will be at my side, and you will be in my bed, and you will be under my protection, always." The words were not a romantic proposal. They were a vow, layered with threat and promise. They were the terms of surrender. He was offering me everything, his world, his power, his protection, his focus, in exchange for my complete and total belonging to him. It was the most terrifying and the most compelling offer I had ever received. "You're asking me to give up everything," I breathed. "I'm asking you to trade a life that broke you for one. I will build with you." His gaze was unwavering. "I saw the fire in you when you analyzed those documents. The intelligence, the passion. You were dying in that old life, Ilara, slowly suffocating in a world that didn't appreciate you. I can give you a world where your mind is your greatest weapon, where your loyalty is your greatest currency. But it is my world, and it is dangerous." He was right. My old life was a ghost, a memory of failure and quiet desperation. This life, here with him, was terrifying, but it was alive. It was real. It was a challenge that ignited every part of me. My mind, my body, my rebellious heart. I thought of the kiss, of the connection that felt more real than anything I had ever known. I thought of the man who grieved his mother, who read poetry, who saw the pattern in the chaos. I thought of the danger, the locked doors, the men with guns. It was a package deal. You couldn't have one without the other. I looked at our joined hands, at his long, powerful fingers wrapped around mine. I looked up and met his eyes, seeing the flicker of vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. He was laying his cards on the table, showing me the monster and the man, and giving me the choice. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The most important one of my life. "Okay," I said. His eyes widened a fraction. Okay. My voice grew stronger. No half measures. A slow, devastating smile spread across his face, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. He lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to my knuckles, his eyes never leaving mine. "Then it's done," he whispered, the words a seal, a vow. "You're mine." And as he pulled me into his arms, kissing me with a tenderness that belied his words, I knew it was true. I had walked into his world a prisoner of circumstance. Now I was staying as a willing captive of his heart. The cage door was open, and I had just chosen to lock it from the inside. The shift was immediate and absolute. The next morning, Clara did not just bring breakfast. She got a selection of new clothes, elegant, understated pieces in soft cashmere and fine silk that fit me perfectly. When I looked at her, she said, "Mr. Rossi's instructions." My room was no longer a guest suite. It was becoming my room. My prison was being transformed into a boudoir. Mateo was different. The careful distance was gone, replaced by a quiet, overwhelming possessiveness. He didn't just hold my hand. His touch was a constant, a hand on the small of my back as he guided me through the hall, his fingers brushing my neck as he passed my chair. It was as if he needed the physical confirmation that I was real, that I was there, that I was his. The staff and the guards saw it, and their demeanor toward me changed. A new, watchful respect replaced the polite indifference. I was no longer the temporary problem. I was the boss's woman. That afternoon, he took me out of the brownstone for the first time. It wasn't a wild public date. It was a calculated, controlled excursion. Franco drove, another car following close behind. We went to a private art gallery that had been closed for our exclusive visit. Matteo walked me through the hushed white rooms, his hand resting possessively on my lower back. He didn't just look at the art. He explained it, his insights sharp and perceptive. He was showing me another facet of his world, the world of legitimate beauty and culture that existed alongside the shadows. It's a way to move money? Of course, he said quietly, standing before a stark, modern sculpture. But it is also a sanctuary, a place where things can be beautiful, without any other purpose. I looked from the sculpture to his profile, seeing the tension there, the weight he constantly carried. In these moments, the power and the danger fell away, and I saw just a man, a complicated, brilliant man, trying to find pockets of peace in a life he could never escape. Later, over a dinner served on the rooftop terrace of the brownstone, the city lights spread out before us like a carpet of diamonds, and the conversation turned more serious. "The situation with Sergio is escalating," he said, swirling the red wine in his glass. His tone was casual, but his eyes were hard. "Sergio?" I asked, the name unfamiliar. "My cousin, my underboss." He took a slow sip. "He has been ambitious. The attempt on my life last month, the one with the truck. I believe he was behind it. The ice I had swallowed on the first night was back in my veins. The one I saved you from?" He nodded. "He sees my interest in you as a distraction, a sign of weakness. He is using it to gather support among the other captains. I put my fork down, my appetite gone. So I really am making you vulnerable." He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "You are making me human. There is a difference. Sergio mistakes humanity for weakness. It is a fatal error." His thumb stroked my wrist. "But it does mean we must be careful. His reach is long. This is why the protection is necessary. Why can you not simply return to your old life?" It was the first time he had openly discussed the mechanics of the threat with me. He was trusting me with this knowledge, pulling me into the inner circle of his conflict. It was terrifying, but it also made me feel like a partner, not just a prize. "I want to help," I heard myself say. A faint smile touched his lips. "You are helping. The work you're doing on the financials is more valuable than you know. You have an eye for the flaw, the inconsistency. It is a skill my accountants lack." He paused, his gaze intense. "But your primary role is to stay safe, to be the one thing in my life that is not a transaction, not a strategy. The one thing that is real." His words wrapped around my heart, both a comfort and a chain. He was building a fortress around me, and I was the treasure he was protecting. But I was starting to wonder if a treasure ever felt the walls closing in. Later, in my room, our room, the thought whispered. The reality of my choice pressed in on me. I stood on the balcony, the night air cool on my skin. The city was alive out there, a world of everyday problems and simple freedoms. I could almost taste it. I thought of Jessica, of the worried texts. I was still deflecting with vague excuses about a demanding new client. The lies were piling up, a wall between me and the person I used to be. I felt him before I heard him. Matteo came to stand behind me, his hands settling on my waist, his chest warm against my back. He rested his chin on my shoulder, and we stood in silence, looking out at the lights. "Having second thoughts?" he murmured, his voice vibrating through me. I leaned back into his strength. "No," I said, and it was the truth. "It's just a lot. It's all happening so fast." "Life happens fast in my world," he said. "You learn to seize what matters when you have the chance." He turned me in his arms to face him. His expression was serious in the moonlight. "I know what I am asking of you. I know the life I am taking from you. But I promise you, Alara, the life I will give you will be more than you can imagine." He kissed me then, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of wine and promise and a future shrouded in danger. And as I kissed him back, I made a choice, not just with my heart, but with my soul. I would embrace this. I would learn the rules of this new world. I would stop looking back at the closed door and start navigating the labyrinth I had chosen to enter. I was Alara Vance, translator and analyst. And now, I am the woman who belongs to Matteo Rossi, and I would not be a liability. I would become an asset in every sense of the word. The days began to take on a new, sharper focus. The documents Franco brought me were no longer just historical financials. They were current, live deals. I was no longer just a translator. I was a forensic analyst, my notes becoming a roadmap for Matteo to navigate the minefield Sergio was laying. I found a twisted satisfaction in it. My professional skills weaponized in a secret war. I was using the mind that had been deemed disposable by my old world to protect the king of a new one. The irony was not lost on me. One evening I found a discrepancy so glaring it felt like a slap. A series of payments, large enough to fund a small army, was routed through a shell corporation I had flagged weeks earlier. The payment description was for consulting services, but the dates aligned perfectly with a known period of unrest among the dock workers, a territory Sergio controlled. I cross-referenced it with notes from a previous file, my heart hammering. It wasn't just embezzlement. It was a payroll. Sergio wasn't just stealing. He was funding a private militia, buying loyalty directly under Matteo's nose. I didn't wait for our usual evening meeting. I gathered my notes and went looking for him. I found him in his study, on the phone, his voice a low, dangerous growl in Italian. He saw me in the doorway and abruptly ended the call. "What is it?" he asked, his annoyance at the interruption fading as he saw the look on my face. I laid the papers on his desk, my fingers stabbing at the figures. "It's a payroll. He's not just skimming, he's building his own army. Look at the dates. This payment cleared 2 days before the incident at the docks. He paid those men to cause that trouble, to make your captain there look weak, to justify a takeover." Matteo's face went utterly still, a mask of cold, controlled fury. He picked up the paper, his knuckles white. He didn't need me to explain further. He saw it instantly, the pattern I had laid bare. This was beyond ambition. This was open rebellion. He was silent for a long minute, the air in the room growing thick with impending storm. Then he looked at me, and the fury in his eyes was tempered with something else. Something fierce and possessive. "You are incredible," he said, his voice low and rough. He came around the desk, took my face in his hands, and kissed me. It was not a kiss of tenderness, but of raw, unleashed passion, a fusion of gratitude and fury. "This is it," he breathed against my lips. "This is the proof I need. He's made his move. Now I will make mine." He called for Franco. The next hour was a whirlwind of quiet, efficient activity. Men came and went, receiving terse, precise instructions. I stood by the window watching the hive mobilize. I was the catalyst. My analysis had lit the fuse. When the room finally cleared, leaving just the two of us, he came to stand beside me. "It happens tonight," he said. "I'm calling a meeting of the captains. I'm exposing him." A cold dread, different from any fear I'd felt for myself, gripped me. "Is it safe?" "For me, yes. For you." He turned to me, his expression grave. "This will force his hand. He will know the information came from inside this house. He will know it was you." He cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin. "I need to move you, somewhere more secure than this. Just for a few days." The thought of being separated from him now, at the moment of greatest danger, was terrifying. "Matteo, it's not a negotiation." "Amore mio," he said, the endearment, the first he'd ever used, sending a shiver through me. "This is the part where you trust me, completely." I looked into his eyes, seeing the strategist, the boss, the man who held my heart in his hands. I saw no hesitation, no doubt, only absolute resolve. "Okay," I whispered. He kissed my forehead. "Pack a bag. Franco will take you in 10 minutes. The somewhere more secure was a penthouse apartment in a sleek, anonymous high-rise. It was even more of a fortress than the brownstone, with a private key-locked elevator and a panoramic view of the city that felt more like a surveillance post than a vista. Franco stationed 4 men inside with me. The mood was tense, ready. I paced the length of the living room, too wired to sit still. My phone, which I'd finally charged, buzzed incessantly with messages from Jessica. I couldn't deal with her now. All my focus was on Matteo, on the meeting that was undoubtedly happening at this very moment. I imagined the room full of powerful, dangerous men, the air thick with betrayal and the threat of violence. I imagined Sergio's face when Matteo laid out the evidence I had found. The hours dragged. I tried to read, to work, but my concentration was shattered. Every minute felt like an hour. I was trapped in a gilded cage, waiting for news from a war I had helped start. Finally, near midnight, the private elevator dinged. I spun around. The doors opened and Matteo stepped out. He was alone. His suit was immaculate, but his face was a mask of cold, brutal finality. There was a fresh, thin cut on his jaw, and his knuckles were raw. He had not come from a board meeting. He had come from an execution. He didn't say a word. He just walked across the room, his eyes locked on mine, and pulled me into his arms. He held me so tightly I could barely breathe, his face buried in my hair. I could feel the tension thrumming through his body, the adrenaline, the residual fury. He smelled of cold night air and gunpowder. "It's done," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. The finality in that single word said everything. Sergio was no longer a threat. He pulled back slightly, his hands framing my face. His eyes searched mine, and for the first time, I saw something there besides control and possession. I saw peace. "You are safe now," he said. "He's gone. The challenge is over." He leaned his forehead against mine. "You stood by my side. You fought with the only weapon you have, and it was sharper than any blade my men carry." He kissed me, a slow, deep, claiming kiss that felt like a new beginning. "Now," he murmured against my lips, "we build our life. For real." And as I kissed him back in that silent, secure penthouse, high above the city where my old life had died, I knew he was right. The war was over. The battle for my soul had been won. By him, by me, and our empire was beginning.